There is a huge difference between studying out of obligation and studying because the brain craves it. Most people only know the first scenario. Studying is something heavy, tiring, that requires constant willpower. Each session becomes an internal struggle. And the more you force yourself, the more your brain starts to reject studying. But there is another state, much rarer. A state in which studying stops being a struggle and becomes an attraction. You feel like sitting down and continuing. Time passes more quickly. Curiosity remains. And studying begins to compete with distractions that once seemed irresistible. This doesn't happen by chance. And it doesn't happen because the person loves studying. It happens because the brain has been conditioned to associate studying with reward, progress, and a sense of control. Just as it learns to seek out social media, games, or quick stimuli, it can learn to seek out study. The mistake is thinking that it depends on liking the subject or having extreme discipline. The brain doesn't work that way. It works by association. Everything that generates consistent reward tends to be repeated. Everything that generates frustration tends to be avoided. Studying, in the traditional way, was taught as punishment. And the brain learned to escape. In this video, you will understand how to trick your brain into getting addicted to studying every day. Not with artificial motivation, but using the same mechanisms that create strong and hard-to-break habits. Dopamine, visible progress, and control of the environment. If you want to transform studying something that requires effort into something that happens almost automatically, subscribe to the channel now. Here, the focus is on deep productivity, study psychology, and real mental control, without illusory shortcuts. Because when the brain starts wanting to study, discipline stops being a problem. And learning starts to accumulate every day. To get the brain addicted to studying, you first need to understand why it usually avoids it. The brain does not shy away from studying itself. It flees from the experience that has been associated with studying over time. Frustration, excessive pressure, comparison, feeling of being behind. Whenever these emotions appear together, the brain learns that studying is a threat, not an opportunity. The brain works through association and repetition. Everything that generates predictable reward tends to be sought again. Everything that generates discomfort without a clear return tends to be avoided. The problem is that traditional studying almost never offers immediate reward. The result comes too late. And the brain hates waiting. Meanwhile, quick stimuli deliver small doses of pleasure all the time. Likes, short videos, notifications. They train the brain to seek instant gratification. When you try to study after that, the contrast is brutal. Studying seems slow, heavy, and unexciting. Most people try to solve this by forcing themselves. But force doesn't create addiction. It creates resistance. The more you force it, the more the brain associates studying with exhaustion. And the stronger that association, the harder it becomes to sit down and study the next day. Getting the brain addicted to studying requires reversing this logic. Make studying generate small, quick, and consistent rewards. Not artificial rewards, but clear signs of progress and control. When the brain perceives that studying leads to noticeable progress, it starts to ask for more. Before discussing practical techniques, it is essential to understand this. You won't get your brain hooked by fighting with it. You will get addicted by teaching the brain to associate studying with a feeling of gain. The first concrete adjustment to start making the brain addicted to studying is to change the size of the perceived reward. The brain does not engage with distant promises. It engages with immediate signs of progress. As long as studying seems like a long effort with no visible return, it will continue to be avoided. Most people try to study thinking about the final result. Passing the exam, learning the subject, mastering an entire topic. For the brain, this is too abstract. He doesn't feel that now. What he feels is the immediate cost of the effort. And that's why he resists. What changes the game is breaking down the study into small, closed units. Each session needs to end with a clear sense of completion. Not study everything, but conclude something. Solve an exercise, understand a concept, finish a specific topic. This closure generates a micro-cognitive reward. When the brain perceives completion, dopamine is released. Not because it was fun, but because there was progress. And the brain learns quickly. Studying leads to progress. Progress generates a good feeling. Good feeling generates repetition. Another important point is to avoid long sessions at the beginning. The goal here is not to study a lot. It's to study and leave with the desire to return. Ending before exhaustion teaches the brain that studying does not completely drain energy. This reduces the resistance in the next session. That's how addiction starts to form. Not by intensity, but by rewarded consistency. Small daily victories create a powerful association. After adjusting the way the brain perceives reward, the next step to make it addicted to studying is to use the environment and ritual to your advantage. The brain responds strongly to patterns. When an action always happens under the same conditions, it starts to anticipate behavior even before you consciously decide. Most people study in a chaotic manner. Each day at a different time, in a different place, with different stimuli. For the brain, this requires constant adaptation. And adaptation consumes energy. The more energy you spend to start, the greater the resistance. Creating a simple ritual solves this. Same time, same place, same preparation. It doesn't have to be something complex. It can be sitting at the same table, opening the same material, always starting with the same type of task. This pattern sends a clear signal to the brain. Now it's time to study. Over time, the brain starts to enter the right state even before the effort begins. The resistance decreases because it already recognizes the context. The study ceases to be a decision and becomes an automatic response to the environment. Another essential point is to eliminate visible distractions. The brain is highly reactive to what is in the visual field. Even if you are not using your phone, just seeing it already consumes part of your attention. The fewer competing stimuli, the easier it is to maintain focus. This adjustment seems simple, but it has a profound effect. It reduces the need for willpower and reinforces the cycle of repetition. Studying happens because everything around points to it. After the environment and ritual are established, the next factor that turns studying into an addictive habit is the proper use of time. The brain does not respond well to long and indefinite sessions, especially at the beginning of the process. It responds to blocks that seem challenging but possible to overcome. When you set a short and fixed time to study, the brain understands that the effort is manageable. This reduces initial resistance and increases the willingness to start. The goal here is not to study a lot, but to study enough to leave with a sense of victory. Another essential point is to always start with an entry task. Something simple, that doesn't require much cognitive effort. This creates a mental warm-up effect. The brain gets into motion before facing more complex content. Forcing difficult tasks right at the beginning generates rejection. Over time, these blocks can be naturally extended. But this only works when the brain has already learned that studying doesn't drain all its energy. When you finish at the right moment, before exhaustion, the brain associates studying with control and not with weariness. This cycle creates a powerful effect. With each session, the brain begins to anticipate the feeling of progress. Dopamine starts to be released not only at the end but already at the beginning of the study. It is at this point that the addiction truly begins to form. If this content makes sense to you, take the opportunity to like the video now. This helps the channel grow and reinforces that this type of scientific approach really works. In the next step, we will show how to avoid the mistakes that break this cycle and make the brain lose interest in studying. What most destroys the attempt to make the brain addicted to studying are subtle mistakes that seem harmless but completely break the reward cycle. The first one is studying only when there's time left over. This turns studying into something secondary. For the brain, everything that is optional quickly loses value. Another common mistake is mixing studying with light distractions. Wrong music, notifications silenced but visible, multiple tabs open. Even when you think you are focused, part of your brain remains on alert, waiting for the next stimulus. This prevents studying from being associated with depth and real satisfaction. There is also the habit of studying until exhaustion on days of excitement and then going days without studying. This irregular pattern confuses the brain. He doesn't learn to associate study with predictability. Learns to associate with wear and tear. And everything that wears you out too much is automatically avoided. Another powerful saboteur is studying without closing cycles. Reading without finishing, watching without applying, accumulating content without a sense of progress. When there is no closure, there is no reward. And without reward, there is no voluntary repetition. To hook the brain, the study needs to end with a clear sense of conclusion, even if it's small. This teaches the brain that it's worth coming back the next day. When you eliminate these mistakes, the cycle starts to strengthen on its own. The brain stops resisting and starts anticipating studying as something positive. In the next step, we will show how to transform this habit into an identity and make studying a natural part of your day, without conscious effort. When studying begins to generate pleasure and repetition, a new risk arises. Silent self-sabotage. Many people break the positive habit the moment they start demanding too much from themselves. They transform something that was flowing into a heavy obligation. The brain immediately perceives this change and starts to resist again. A common mistake is increasing the load too quickly. Because it's working now, the person tries to double the time, increase the difficulty, and demand maximum performance every day. This breaks the balance. The brain learns that studying has become exhausting again and starts to lose interest. Another saboteur is comparing your own pace with that of others. When studying stops being an internal game of progress and becomes an external comparison, the reward diminishes. The brain does not respond well to constant judgment. It responds to personal progress. There is also the myth that studying obsessively means never failing. That doesn't exist. Bad days are part of the process. The problem is not failing one day. It's using that as an excuse to stop completely. The brain learns patterns of abandonment very quickly. To maintain a healthy habit, the focus needs to be on consistency, not perfection. Studying a little every day is worth more than long and irregular sessions. The brain prefers predictability to intensity. If you've noticed that you demand too much from yourself or give up when something goes off plan, take a moment to like the video. This helps the channel continue bringing content that shows how to build discipline without self-sabotage. In the next step, we will show how to consolidate all of this into a simple system that keeps the brain engaged in studying in the long term. When studying becomes a regular occurrence, the brain begins to consolidate something even more powerful than habit. It consolidates identity. Gradually, you stop being someone who tries to study and become someone who studies. This change seems subtle, but it completely alters the way the brain responds to effort. Neuroscience shows that the brain seeks coherence between identity and behavior. When you see yourself as someone who studies every day, skipping a session creates internal discomfort. Not because you forced yourself, but because that no longer aligns with who you believe you are. This is the point where the positive addiction strengthens. The study stops depending on external stimuli. It becomes sustained by internal consistency. You study because that's what you do. Not because someone ordered you to, not because there is an immediate demand. To reinforce this identity, small records help a lot. Mark the days studied, track completed sessions, visualize the sequence. Not to pressure yourself, but to show your brain that there is continuity. The brain values sequence more than intensity. Another important factor is to protect this habit. Do not negotiate studying with unnecessary distractions. Don't trade for quick stimuli. Every time you choose to study instead of running away, you reinforce the identity that is being built. That's how the brain starts to crave studying. Not for superficial pleasure, but for internal coherence. Keeping the brain addicted to studying requires a simple but respected system. The first point is to protect the study schedule as something non-negotiable. It doesn't need to be long, but it needs to be fixed. When the brain knows that moment happens every day, it prepares automatically. The resistance decreases even before it starts. Next, it is essential to keep the study associated with visible progress. Each session should end with something completed. A concept understood, a list completed, a problem solved. This daily closure keeps dopamine active and reinforces the desire to repeat it the next day. Another essential point is not to mix study with punishment. If a day was unproductive, the mistake is not demanding more from yourself the next day. The mistake is trying to compensate with excess. The brain learns better with regularity than with extremes. Adjusting and continuing is more effective than pushing yourself. It is also important to renew interest. Alternating formats, changing the order of the content, or applying what has been learned helps to avoid saturation. The brain likes controlled novelty. This keeps studying stimulating without becoming a distraction. Over time, studying ceases to be a planned task and becomes a natural impulse. Something you miss when you don't do it. This is the sign that the positive habit has been created. In the end, getting the brain addicted to studying is not manipulation. It's re-education. For years, the brain was trained to associate studying with empty effort, pressure, and frustration. When you change that association, everything transforms. Studying stops being something you have to force yourself to do and becomes something that happens because the system is well constructed. When the brain learns that studying generates daily progress, a sense of control, and a consistent identity, it starts to demand that behavior. Not for immediate pleasure, but because it makes sense to him. Studying becomes a source of stability amidst the chaos of rapid stimuli and constant distractions. This is the point where discipline stops being a problem. You no longer need to negotiate, convince, or motivate yourself. You simply sit down and start. The resistance exists, but it is weak. And over time, it almost disappears. If you want to continue developing this type of mental control, subscribe to the channel now. Here you learn deep productivity, study psychology, and scientific methods to build strong habits, without relying on infinite willpower. Remember this. The brain will always seek what generates consistent reward. When you teach the brain that studying is a gain and not a loss, it adapts. And when it adapts, learning accumulates every day. Studying stops being an isolated effort and becomes a lifestyle. A positive addiction. Silent, powerful, and extremely difficult to break.